Hello, I'm the Dark Master. Crabs! You've heard about them. Indeed, they're probably the most well-known arthropod groups outside of insects and spiders. And, hopefully you don't personally have any of them, if you know what I mean. They have proliferated throughout human culture and throughout nature itself like a cancer. And even got an entire scientific term, carcinization, named after them. We'll return to that later, but would it shock you that crabs were not always a thing, but instead a whole different group of animals filled the crab niche in the Paleozoic and early Mesozoic? The Cyclids. Now, the Cyclida, also called in some old papers / sources cycloids, though that's generally frowned upon, are a group you've probably never heard of before, unless either A, you're super into obscure fossil invertebrates like myself, or B, looked at that poll I did recently. Though, funnily enough, I was planning on doing this video first anyway, but it's always nice to see your guys' thoughts on stuff. Indeed, if you look up the group on YouTube, it is so obscure, for example, you will only get videos about Cyclids, a group of fish that I've heard make good pets, but I personally don't have any experience with. But I find this obscurity unacceptable, so join me as I inform you on this group's anatomy, ecology, diversity to be found within them, their evolutionary history, impact on human culture, and in the end, what may have happened to them. Before any of that, however, I think I should answer the question that's probably on your mind right now. What exactly are the Cyclida? Which is far more complicated than you might think to answer. Alright, so on a basic level, all more derived animals are divided into two broad groups, with the asterisk that there has been some recent work that may challenge some of this stuff, but it's not really relevant for this video, so let's resume focus. Relevant of the two are the protostomes, who are distinguished by how they develop their mouth first in their embryological development as opposed to developing the anus first. They are themselves divided into two groups. The Spiralia, noted for their distinct larval forms that have a spiral cleavage and include likes of mollusks, rotifers, and various more obscure relatives. More relevant, however, are the second group of protostomes, the Ecdysozoa, distinguished by how they have growth by ecdyasis, i.e. the molting of an exterior cuticle. They are divided into two groups. First are the Scelidophora, which include such animals as King-Coryinx, aka mud dragons, and priapulid worms, better known by the slightly inappropriate name penis worms. More relevant for this video are the Cryptovermes, which itself are divided into two main branches. The Nematoida, which includes the nematodes and the very similar but more obscure Nematomorpha, better known as horsehair worms, and the second group, more relevant to us, are the Panarthropoda, which are distinguished by having a segmented body, paired appendages, and a ladder-like nervous system to control said body. They are divided into three living groups, excluding the Lobopodia, which are a paraphyletic collection of interesting stem forms that we don't have time to explore right now. First are the minuscule Tardigrada, better known as water bears, and are famous for their supposed ability to survive almost everything. Then we got to the bizarre onychophorans, better known as velvet worms, that shoot slime to capture prey and give live birth, shockingly enough. And lastly, we come to the arthropods, distinguished from their close relatives by a mineralized exoskeleton and jointed legs. They are by far the most diverse group of animals ever, so for the sake of time, we're going to have to skip a lot of basal extinct forms. Arthropods are divided into four main groups. First are the arthropods, most famous for, trilobites, who have made an entire video series on, so I won't dwell on too much. Then there are the Silicerata, which includes horseshoe crabs, arachnids, and their relatives. I've already gone into detail about those in two previous videos. but they're distinguished by the silicerae mouthparts. Meanwhile, the mandibulata are distinguished by a set of mandibles, which are a modified set of legs used to eat. In addition to a few contentious basal forms like the Hymenocarea and Euthyrocarcinoidea, the mandibulata are themselves divided into two main groups. First are the Myriapoda, which have many legs and are represented by the likes of millipedes, centipedes, and their more obscure relatives. Second and more relevant are the Pancrustacea, the last of the four main groups, a grouping that is mainly supported by genetic studies, ignoring a few contentious extinct forms that may or may not be Pancrustacea, like the Thylacocephala and Scaracaridae. They are divided into three major classes. The most basal one is the Oligostraca, which includes the familial ostracods, better known as seed shrimps, and much more obscure things like fish lice, tongue worms, and Mystacocarids. Next are the Allotriocarida, whose names means different crustaceans, and include the likes of water fleas, clam shrimp, fairy shrimp, tadpole shrimp, the bizarre and obscure horseshoe shrimp, remipedes, and most famously the hexapods, aka insects and their close relatives, which might be a shock to you, but insects are just a really derived group of crustaceans, albeit one so heavily modified that they don't really resemble most other ones. The third major group of pancrustacea are the multicrustacea, or numerous crustaceans. And indeed, they are quite numerous, being the most common and diverse group, second only to insects, of all crustaceans in terms of diversity. They themselves are divided into four classes. Most obscure are the Tentulocarida, a small group of around 33 species that are mostly parasites of larger crustaceans. Tentulocus dieteri is, interestingly enough, the smallest arthropod in the world, reaching only 0.0033 inches long. Second are the Thecostraca, better known as barnacles, with around 2,200 species. Second largest are the Copepoda, with around 13,000 species, commonly known as plankton, but they can also be found as parasites, live in ephemeral ponds, wet leaf litter, and even bromeliads. None have ever been found in college, though, so maybe plankton was lying about that. Lastly are the Malcostraca, which have 40,000 living species in 16 orders and include many famous crustaceans like crabs, lobsters, crayfish, shrimp, prawn, mantis shrimp, roly-polies, krill, amphipods, and so many others that we just don't have time to talk about. With this in mind, now that we've introduced this, surely we know where cyclids fit, right? Sadly, no. Indeed, while we have learned much in recent years about the Cyclida, where exactly they fit is heavily disputed. So unlike some of my previous biology videos, I can't really tell you exactly where they go. While it's generally thought that they fit within the multicrustaceans, this is also heavily disputed, and they might actually be more related to one of the other subcategories. They're seemingly their own class within multicrustaceans, if they are one, having split off before the split between copepods and malcostracians. So yeah, they're pretty ancient and unique, and we don't really know where exactly they fit. One could say they are the great uncles of true crabs, if you wanted to use the word great a lot. Hopefully that answered your question, and now that we've answered that, let's discuss their anatomy for a bit. So, in terms of their anatomy, luckily, unlike trilobites, there's not a lot of special terms that need explanations. From the top, cyclids have an upper carapace, or aka the top half of a shell, which could either be flattened or dome-shaped, with various shapes and all sorts of ornamentations. We must go to the underside to continue our discussion of anatomy. So let us do that. We see all of the head and thorax have been sort of fused into one, akin to what is seen in certain completely unrelated arachnids. The first three pairs of legs are modified into cillae, or as they are more often called, claws, which they would have used to manipulate objects like food. Behind those, there are two pairs of antennae, although technically the first larger pair are called attenules. Functionally, they're both just antennae, and I don't know why they're given distinct names. Then we see five pairs of walking legs for movement. In the center, we see a mouth region, as well as some horseshoe-shaped gills covered in semicircular plates. Lastly, there are these strange blade-like shapes growing out of their posterior called caudal rami. Seen in a few other groups like copepods, what they are used for is sort of debated. In living forms, it's for locomotion, but in the radically different shaped cyclids, it's not known what they were used for. Maybe to potentially cover up reproductive organs, but that's very disputed. Now that we've covered their anatomy, however, let us talk about the diversity to be found within cyclids. Alright, so the order Cyclida is divided into 6 families, though one is a bit contentious, discounting the genera Anhelcocephalon and Magnetocyclus, who are of disputed positions. These are the following. First and most well known are the Cyclidae, which are technically speaking the only ones you should actually call cyclids, as technically, if you wanted to be most scientifically accurate, you'd call the order the Cyclidens, but everyone usually refers to all of them as cyclids, but just for full transparency, you really should only call these guys that. Not really relevant, but I feel it's worth mentioning. They consist of around 8 genera, such as Cyclus itself, which was a bit of a wastebasket taxon for a lot of early domed cyclids, but was later refined down to just one, as well as Prolaticyclus, Uralcyclus, Ambocyclus, the bean-shaped Carabicyclus, Litocyclus, Tanzanchylus, and the very spiny Crumnocevaene. This family is known from Ireland, North America, Eurasia, and Japan, first emerging in the Tourmaisian stage of the very early Mississippian around 358 million years ago or so, and lasted until the Azelian stage of the Permian around 295 million years ago or so. Smaller is the family Americlidae, which consists of 5 genera, of which they are distinguished by flattened and more oval carapaces with wider marginal rims. Despite the name, only 2 of which, those being Americlus and Diziclus, are found in the Americas, with the other 3 located elsewhere. There's Euanocyclus, known from China, Britannicus from Britain, and Malayacyclus, known from where else? Malaysia. They emerged in the Wysian stage of the Middle Mississippian around 346.7 million years ago, and lasted until the Ancien stage of the Middle Triassic around 245 or 7 million years ago. The next family, the Hemetrochistidae, are similarly sized with around 5 genera, distinguished by a strongly convexed carapace represented by genera such as Scunonocyclus, Hemetrochiscus, the sun-shaped Cyclocarinides, the Bombi Unocarinus, and Paraprosopon. They emerged in the Moscovian stage of the Middle Pennsylvanian around 315 million years ago, and lasted until the Carnian stage of the Late Triassic around 230 million years ago or so, and are known from Italy, Germany, Russia, and Slovakia. The next family, Scraminidae, is distinguished by an overall circular carapace with prominent rostral lobes that are well defined, as well as an axial keel that extends the whole length of the body. This is a smaller family with 3 genera: Scramine, Apienochelys, Creon, and Uplanka, known from Madagascar, Poland, and Mason Creek, Illinois, and lasted from the Baskerian stage of the Lower Pennsylvanian, also called the Late Carboniferous, around 323.4 million years ago, and lasted until the Carnian stage of the Triassic. The last non-contentious family are the Halicinidae, distinguished by ornate carapaces that are moderately inflated. They contain three genera: the shield-shaped Halicynine, the most ornate cyclid of all time, Carcinaspides, and Juracyclus. They emerged in the Olenkian stage of the early Triassic around 249.9 million years ago and lasted until the Taurasian stage at the end of the early Jurassic around 183 million years ago, and are mostly known from Germany and surrounding regions in Central Europe. There is, however, a sixth family, the Alinsasucaridae, which are sometimes said to in fact be true crabs, but most recent sources do confirm that they are cyclids. But I figure it's worth mentioning in either case. They are also the least diverse family, with only two genera, Alasucaris and Maastrichtiocaris, known from the late Albian around 100 million years ago to the Maastrichtian around 67 million years ago or so, meaning the last cyclids may have seen T-Rex. Now that we've discussed their diversity a bit, even though it's really only a review, as most of these genera had many species, let us now discuss cyclids as actual animals, aka what their ecology was, i.e. how they lived. Alright, so in terms of ecology, there hasn't been as much work into it since everyone is mostly focused on trying to figure out what exactly they are, but we do have some ideas. One now discarded is that they were parasitic, but now, due to their size and well-calcified exoskeletons, it's thought that they were actually free-living, bottom dwellers that lived in many ways like crabs, manipulating objects with their claws. They were likely predators, others were scavengers, there were plant eaters, and detritivores. They have also been found in a large variety of oceanic habitats, such as lagoons, reefs, the deep abyss, and even a few species that made the transition to brackish and freshwater habitats. It seems that they were mostly solitary, but would gather in groups of up to 50 on occasion, potentially for either mating or molting purposes. Most were also very small, with the largest only reaching a 2.4-inch length carapace as opposed to the massive sizes modern crabs can reach. The wide variety of carapaces could also have played a role. Smooth ones would have been better at burrowing or swimming, while those with more ornate carapaces could have used them both as direct defense with spines, but also in combination with cryptic coloration to break up the outline to hide better in reefs. On the flip side, some could theoretically have been toxic and have had a bright warning color, so this is all very speculative. Given how generalistic and diverse they were, you might be wondering what exactly happened to them, as unlike, say, the trilobites, they weren't really pushed into a corner by previous extinctions. Well, let us discuss that now and answer that question to the best of our ability. Alright, so let us start out at the beginning. The first cyclids showed up in the very beginning of the Mississippian in the wake of the Devonian mass extinction event and had high diversity right off the bat, likely filling the empty niches once monopolized by trilobites. This diversity continued throughout the Permian as they were seemingly mostly unaffected by the end Carboniferous mass extinction event, though the Great Dying did hit them hard, with the family Cyclidae being lost either due to it or shortly beforehand. But in the end, they did survive this, being one of only three groups of arthropods generally associated with the Paleozoic that made it into the Mesozoic, the other two being the similarly enigmatic Euthryocarcinoids and the Thylacocephalans, both of which may be the subject of future videos at some point. They continued to be diverse into the Triassic. However, in the Jurassic, they began a steep and sudden decline. Why, you may ask? Was it perhaps related to an extinction event? From what we can tell, not really, because the decline started after the end Triassic mass extinction event during a period of relative environmental peace. No, instead, it seems that there was a change in the biological settings of the time, with tree crabs of the Branchiura and the Anomura, which includes the hermit crabs and their relatives, emerging. And though they both seemingly split during the end Triassic, the Jurassic is where they really started to radiate wildly. This coincides with how the cyclids were much rarer into the Jurassic and much more centralized into certain regions, and there's an extremely long gap until the Cretaceous forms show up, if they even are actually cyclids. If they're not, then the decline is even more striking. And even if they are cyclids, it's very clear at this point by the Cretaceous they were very much limited to certain regions and certain niches. And while this could potentially be the result of preservation bias, the fact that they have a very well mineralized skeleton like trilobites indicates that this rarity is more a reflection of reality as opposed to fossil biases. And given that they had survived previous severe mass extinctions like the End-Devonian, the Campanian mass extinction event, the Great Dying, and the End-Triassic mass extinction event, it seems unlikely that any environmental effects had really hurt them. And in fact, it was the evolution of the first crabs, such as Eocarcinus, that seemed to have pushed them out of their former dominance into specialization. In the end, they seem to have died out shortly before the end Cretaceous mass extinction event. They theoretically may have lasted until the very end to be wiped out by the asteroid, but that's conjecture, and we don't really know that for sure, so most likely they died out shortly beforehand. It's kind of a shame, and why it happened, we don't really know. We can't really test what advantages true crabs may have as opposed to cyclids having. It just seems that crab slash the crab niche are a lot more competitive of a place compared to like trilobites or ammonites, which saw several entire orders coexisting at any one time. In contrast, it seems in this case that crabs are just built different, and instead of having three groups of crab like organisms, we really only have like one and a half. And it's just kind of sad, really. It would have been cool to see cyclists still around. They could have helped us, understand more about the early evolution of crustaceans. But despite being gone, they did influence the culture of a certain naked ape long after their end. So let's discuss that now. Sadly, unlike ammonites and even trilobites, cyclids have not really penetrated into any music, video games, movies, toys, television, and other such widely available media. There have been some really good paleo art, though admittedly not much, and I've probably used almost all of it in this video. Interestingly, they never even really show up on online discussions all that much. Carcinization, which I mentioned before, was sort of a contentious meme. One side saying crabs are the pinnacle of evolution, and the other side says that carcinization doesn't really exist, and that it's more like parallel evolution and not convergent evolution. It's not as widespread as people say and just being limited to crabs' close relatives. Honestly, I'm going to be a bit of a centrist here and say that both are honestly kind of stupid. Sure, there are some people who, spread misinformation. After all, evolution doesn't really have a specific set goal in mind, but cyclids disprove the notion that it's limited only to the close relatives of crabs, as they represent an entirely separate branch of crustaceans that converged on it. But there is one genre that has seen them take on a bit of a role, even if it's very small. Speculative evolution, which, to explain briefly, is a phenomenon in the art world that explores the themes of evolution in a speculative and hypothetical context, such as alternative timelines, the future, etc., etc. They're best represented by the likes of After Man, which was a book series made by Dougal Dixon. The first speculative evolution piece involving cyclids was made on February 4th, 2024, by the artist The Siren Lord for the Great Thriving Speculative Evolution Project. Sadly, they were disqualified for petty reasons that had nothing to do with the entry itself, because Decorex, the guy who ran the sort of project, was a petulant man-child who then went on to lie and get him blacklisted from the paleo stream, but that's a subject for a future video, so let's just leave that right there. Despite this, the guy would continue to do many more speculative evolution instances of cyclids. Other people have also done some good speculative evolution entries based on this group, such as the Hooley Dude, Cornork's Drawing, and Vincent's Bow 1. Personally, if I was to offer any sort of criticism, which I'm probably not qualified to do, I think that a lot of these designs are great, and going forward, I think they could probably draw more from crabs, as there's a lot of variety there and material to work with. And with that, we're done. Hopefully, I've provided a sufficiently thorough and fun coverage of these neat little goobers that I think deserve more love, and hopefully you like them now too. I'd also like to take a brief period to shout out the work of Carrie E. Schweitzer, Rodney Feldman, and Eduard Maiko. Their paper, Revision of Cyclida with 5 new genera, was a key source while researching for this video, and frankly, much like trilobites.info, it is probably the one-stop shop if you'd like to learn more about this group. So I'll link it in the description down below, because it's genuinely an amazing paper for anyone who has any level of interest in this group. Anyway, I'm the Dark Master. If you liked the video, liked it, but if you loved it, consider subscribing and share it around. Take care and have a wonderful day.